Hello, good morning. Thank you for joining us for Lab Live number 2. For those of you that are joining us today for the first time, these webinars are brought to you by Lab Innovations to aim to give you some useful knowledge and practical advice to help you in your lab. So we recently ran a survey asking Lab Innovations attendees what key challenges in their lab are at the moment, and social distancing, unsurprisingly, was one of the most common answers. So as social distancing seems to be here to stay, we're delighted to have Tom Wickstead joining us, who will share advice on how to make practical and effective changes to the lab. And he'll also inform us about sort of important aspects to bear in mind before moving furniture or equipment on site to maintain social distancing. So Tom is the Commercial Director of International Laboratory Relocation Specialist at APORT, and I'm sure you'll come away from this webinar with loads of useful tips to take away. For those of you that haven't met me before, my name's Katie Gray. I'm the Marketing Manager here on Lab Innovations. Just before I hand it over to Tom, I've got a few housekeeping tips which I want to run through. So in the webinar, you'll see on the right-hand side, there's a little arrow. So we have a chat function, so you can chat amongst yourselves. We also have a questions function where you can ask questions, and then other people that are on the webinar can upvote those questions, and Tom can answer those at the end. So the format is Tom will run through his presentation and go through some case studies, and then at the end we can ask and he can answer some questions. And we also have a polls tab, so we will be running some polls throughout, so look out for those and you can vote on certain things there. There is a slightly annoying pinging sound sometimes every time the chat function goes off, so there's a little audio button which you can mute at the top there if it just gets a bit too distracting. I think that's all for now, so Tom, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Katie. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me on this webinar. And obviously, it's a pretty relevant topic at the moment, especially given what happened yesterday. So we will, obviously, the title of this webinar is Adapting to the New Normal, Practicalities of the Socially Distanced Lab. And it's a really interesting topic because we've been involved with a huge amount of companies recently trying and looking at their laboratories and trying to figure out ways that we can help end users and of course, obviously management and the companies begin and help with social distancing within the lab. So I wanted to start with this this quote which I found, which was pretty relevant, and I'll read it out to you, which is: a huge driver of this pandemic is infectivity, and the social distancing aspects are a major part of containment. So how do you do that in a busy research lab? And it's a really good question because obviously you guys will know how difficult and how busy some laboratories are. Research laboratories especially can be. And so, you know, how do we manage this from a safety point of view? So a little bit of an introduction so you know who I am. So my name is Tom Wickstead, Commercial Director at APORT. I've been involved within the laboratory relocation space for the best part of 6 years now. And I've managed some of the world's largest relocation projects throughout the world, really. So we have a footprint worldwide. We do a huge amount of work in the UK, obviously Europe. We've done work in Africa, North America, Asia, everywhere where we can get a plane, we'll certainly go to. And we've been involved within the relocation space for the best part of 40 years now. And the actual laboratory relocation side of the business is a huge part of our business, and it's constantly growing. So here's a little bit more introduction about APORT. Again, really, we focus on sort of a few different elements, which is sample relocation. So if it's moving anything from -80 samples to -20, 2 to 8 degrees, 15 to 25, so ambient, anywhere in the world. We do a huge amount of work relocating single instruments for manufacturers. And we do a huge amount of work with relocating multi-department laboratories. So say if an organization is closing down and they built a new facility, then we'll be involved in that whole project. We've got really brilliant links with the manufacturers, and we relocate all their equipment for them. So whether that's Agilent, PerkinElmer, Thermo Fisher, Shimadzu, and a number of others. And obviously we've got operational capability throughout Europe, North America and Asia. So again, I just wanted to flick through some photos just to give you a bit of a background about what we can do. So again, there's my good self donning a high-vis jacket while we relocate some reagents. And so again, sample relocations is a huge part of our business. And again, how does this tie in with the social distance lab? Well, you know, a number of organizations have been sort of redistributing assets, and it could be sample assets, to different parts of their business, as maybe they are trying to create additional space or trying to help with workflows as well. Again, single instruments, we do a huge amount. So here's a nice Agilent piece of kit, and we do a huge amount of work for Agilent and a huge amount of work for other manufacturers as well. So whether it's just literally just taking the instrument and relocating it within the lab from benchtop to benchtop, or whether it's taken from the loading bay onto the benchtop, or relocating anywhere in the world, then we can help with that. And again, this is quite a relevant photo because obviously one of our crew members is wearing a mask. Again, so you know we've got a number of vehicles that we can help with relocations. And again, another relevant photo, and this was actually an internal relocation very recently, actually. Again, I can't mention who it was for, but we've been doing a huge amount of internal relocations while labs look at trying to manage space for their end users. I wanted to just give you a bit of an overview of some of the work we've done before. And this was for a pharmaceutical company in Ivory Coast. 8-month project, 800 assets. This is pre-lockdown, so I must add, but just gives you an idea of some of the types of work we get involved in. So it was managing equipment manufacturers, huge amount of equipment being distributed around the world as a HQ got closed down. So some of the points we will discuss during this webinar is health and safety, safe working guidelines, which the links, I have put the links within this presentation, so you can go and have a look at them. Again, there has to be some level of common sense involved within this. You know, it's difficult for businesses of all sizes. It's difficult for labs. And, you know, there has to be a level, you know, that ultimately we are all trying to run businesses, and those businesses have to turn a profit. But I've put those working guidelines in there as well. So if there is anything that needs clarifying, social distancing within the lab, again, we'll talk about that, and working safely during COVID-19. So how laboratories are managing post-COVID-19. So I wanted to throw in this case study, this example of PHE. So we were involved with PHE during the height of lockdown, and we relocated internally within their lab a huge amount of equipment, and we also stored a huge amount of equipment for them. Sort of, I like to say limited use assets, but really it's just pieces of equipment or furniture that was either in the way, that wasn't being used as much, that they could do without for the next 3-4 months. And we also tried to help them with pinch points. So that could be areas of congestion, such as glass washers, entry and exit points within the lab, anywhere that's busy within the lab. And obviously moving furniture, but trying to create a better space for them that they could, you know, allow for social distancing. So again, you'll see the clustered workbenches behind that photo there, and this is, you know, I mean, this is the difficult thing because, you know, when we first arrived, pretty much everything, certainly the end users would say, well, we need all this equipment. But obviously, you know, there has to be, we have to try and create a safe space for them. And so we stored a lot of equipment for them, assets that weren't being used. We stored, you'll see some of the packaging material there's assets start to be packed away. And it was a really strange time during the height of lockdown. I remember traveling down there, and there was been on the M40 a million times, and just seeing one car in front of me and one lorry behind me was at 8 a.m. in the morning was extremely surreal. But we helped them, certainly helped the end users anyway, social distancing within their lab. And again, look, it's so difficult because all of this has to be managed with a reduction in staff. There might be an increase in workload currently for you. You might be staggering arrival times. There's a huge, and also you've got pressures on the business. You know, ultimately, we need to continue science. So it is. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is tricky to do at the best of times. And a little comment, this can make working within the laboratory space extremely frustrating, complicated and stressful. Obviously you guys will know that better than myself, but it is, I think the point I'm trying to get across is understand how difficult it is. So again, we've assisted with a number of internal relocations. We've helped with rework of laboratory environments, and that, again, I've talked about high-use items, glass washers being relocated to different areas, away from entry and exit points, even to the point of flammable cabinets being moved to somewhere that's obviously safe and where they're allowed to be. Dismantling furniture and obviously having to reduce the amount of seats that are within the lab, stalls rather. So it is tricky. So labs that have been shut down, I thought I'd include this so that people understand that, you know, there's been a number of university laboratories, whether it's teaching labs, that sort of thing, that have been closed during this time period, and now they're starting to reopen. And some of the things that we need to think about, so whether it's phase who's returned, so obviously initially facility staff, facility managers, looking at utilities and infrastructure into safe working condition. Obviously, they haven't been used. Minimum number of critical lab personnel to assess restart needs, a remainder of workforce, and also we've got to tie all of this in with monitoring and managing people that potentially will test positive for COVID-19, and obviously have a clear plan and trigger into what to do if that happens. And also, obviously, given what happened yesterday, and obviously we're not talking about full lockdown like we had in March, but what do we need to think about if we had to shut down again if needed? So I've put together some key checklist items to think about that we can all think about when if labs have been shut or during this period, which is work with your facility and safety officers to create a plan that ensures efficiency, maintains physical distancing, and encourages mindful practice of people and movement. And obviously there might be some politics around that to some extent. Training documents for lab staff on physical distancing practices within the lab space, and assessing and wearing appropriate PPE. It's all common sense. New material handling procedures, waste management. So does waste management change at all? Work shifts, how does that impact the business first off? And obviously, how does that impact social distancing? And working alone procedures and equipment scheduling. I mean, working alone procedures is a really good point. Obviously, we're trying to limit our interaction with others, but then there's issues around working alone and the dangers that can have. Procedures for staff working in offices and for visits to conference meetings and lunchroom spaces. Obviously, we're doing this webinar virtually. A master sketch of designated work areas in your lab space, a schedule, a daily sign-off sheet to help keep track of new shift schedules as well. So more checklist items to think about: provide a master sketch of the lab space, a schedule and daily sign-off sheet to staff, and determine if there will be testing for employees on site. Again, this has cost elements, and whether individual temperature and symptom checks will be required. And ultimately, that's up to individual businesses as to how they want to, and individual labs, how they want to proceed with that, and specific measures in place. Some more checklist items here. Again, I'll let you read some of them, but ensure a booking system for equipment is available for staff and aligns with new shift times. So obviously this changes things. And identify PPE that will be available. I mean, you know, it's a lot of the times within labs we're blessed because we've been used to wearing PPE, and a majority of the time it's nothing new, whether it's just a lab coat and glasses or if it is a face covering. Obviously, how does that change things? Well, it doesn't. We've also got to think about lab duties and how this changes. So I put together, this is a little sort of spreadsheet that if people would like this from me, I can give them to you on an email. And it just is a way of thinking about the different duties that might change and who's responsible for them within the lab. It's really self-explanatory. So whether it's waste, there's a number of different duties on there that you can add in, of course, and relate them around your own lab and how that changes things and who's responsible. And obviously, individually, end users might have new responsibilities because of what's happening, limited amount of staff, and their duties might change. So it's making sure they understand what their new duties are and how this impacts them and how this impacts their working day. Chemical inventories as well. Again, you know, we have been involved, it might sound so stupid, but we've been involved in relocating chemicals to try and make additional space. And you might think, well, I've only got a few powders or, you know, a few chemicals and a few beakers and not a lot. But some, obviously, labs have a huge amount of chemicals and are trying to scale that down somewhat to try and make additional space for their end users, or even if they've taken on additional work and they need new equipment in there, just trying to look at different space. But if your lab has been closed and you're recently opening, then obviously have a look at chemical inventories, if they're expired, etc., etc. So this is HSE's Safe Working Guidelines, and there's the link there if anyone wants to take a look at it. And you know, again, common sense, stagger arrival times, floor markings from arrival through to departure. If you're a lab that hasn't been closed and you've been operating throughout this, then this will all be common sense to you and you'll be completely used to it. One-way flows, obviously 2 meter distancing, and consider any pinch points. And pinch points could be write-up areas. It could be even going from the laboratory to offices. It could be completely separate to lab. It could be lunch areas, etc. So some of the things we know is a COVID-19 risk assessment and share that with all staff. There has been instances where businesses and companies have got in trouble for not taking it too seriously. Failure to complete a risk assessment which takes account of COVID-19, or completing a risk assessment but failing to put in place sufficient measures to manage the risk of COVID-19 could constitute a breach of health and safety law, which is obviously something that we don't want to get involved in. It's easy enough to put these processes in place. It's just difficult sometimes to continue them, and that can be where the issue lies. Labs and research facilities require an on-site collaboration between people, often in close proximity, and the flexibility of both shifts and floor layouts may be limited. There is a high use of multiple use items, such as testing machines and apparatus, not all which can be washed down. Again, these are comments I've taken and people are struggling with, which can be understood. So again, can you restrict access to some areas if that's even possible? I mean, facility managers would say that we need access to the whole building, but are there storage areas that potentially are are areas that you could restrict access to if need be, consumable, storerooms that maybe could be locked, walk-in fridges or freezers, using one-way flow in long corridors. If workstations need to be shared, they should be shared by the smallest number of people. Again, it's somewhat common sense. And where it's not possible to move workstations apart, use screens to separate staff. We've seen that in a number of businesses and obviously retail outlets as well. Limit the use of high-touch equipment such as instruments or reprocessing equipment. And I've talked about dishwashers and multiple-use high-touch equipment, beakers, glassware. It's very difficult, and obviously the increase it may be potentially washing that can have as well. So if you've got equipment that hasn't been used in a long time, maybe because you've been shut down, maybe because your work has changed somewhat, then it's really important to make sure that it doesn't invalidate your service contract with any equipment manufacturers. If your equipment has been shut down and then you're restarting it. So again, contact your equipment manufacturer and mention that you're restarting, or potentially if you have an annual PM or servicing requirement, try and tie that in with when you restart the pieces of equipment. Can spacing between benches be widened to improve distances or create two-way flows? And of course, can you put some unused items into storage to create more free space to aid distancing? And we've seen that time and time again. Ever since universities have come back online, for want of a better phrase, they have been requiring storage space to try and aid social distancing. And also, as different areas of the labs maybe a change for different uses, then rather than them just being sat there, they'd rather put them into storage and potentially use that space for something else. We've talked about this before, but employees need to also monitor workers closely for illness and have clear triggers and procedures to shut down labs again if needed. And one question within the US is whether employees are liable if someone gets sick after returning to work. And this is a particularly quite tricky question. It's obviously not a question I can answer, but it's something that certainly in the US they are thinking about, is who is responsible. So the space plan of your lab may well be set around certain specific items, and it could be easier than you think to move these items and create a more flexible layout. Contact your manufacturer if you are thinking of moving them, if they're on service contract, or by all means contact us and we can certainly help you and liaise with your equipment manufacturers on your behalf. Consider the location of reprocessing and prep areas, and obviously these can cause blockages of one-way routes. For example, again, I keep mentioning glass washers. If they're being unloaded or loaded, these can be a busy area. So is it possible to relocate these into their own room, potentially storage area? But again, glass washers and all the like need servicing to them. And so do these areas have that? Looking at workflows, if some of the staff are seated in the same location, obviously seat them further away from doors, and people who have to move between different locations should be nearer doors so they're not walking past others more than necessary. Again, these are just things that we need to think about during this time. So what can we do to help? Well, obviously we can assist with relocating instrumentation of any size. That ranges from everything from a balance up through to NMRs, autoclaves, chemicals. We can relocate chemicals, we can store chemicals, we can obviously store instrumentation and samples, peripheral items, furniture, anything internal within the lab or your building. And then obviously we can store them. So whether it's relocating internally or whether it's relocating into another facility that you own, whether that's in the UK, Europe or worldwide. And of course, storage of instrumentation, storage of furniture, which we've been doing a huge amount for our customers at the moment, storage of chemicals, samples, peripheral items, and I've mentioned there furniture, desks or chairs, is anything that we can assist you with. And it's been a really strange time for us at the moment, because during the height of lockdown, we were really busy. Then it started to somewhat tail off a little bit. And then ever since the universities have opened back up again, we've just seen that work that potentially has been cancelled or moved or postponed kick back into life, if you like, ever since universities have opened. So it's a really, really busy time for us at the moment. And a huge part of our work is related, fortunately, to what's going on at the moment with COVID-19. So thank you very much for joining me anyway, and I hope some of the information you've got from this webinar has been useful. Hopefully, if you think about anything that you need relocating, send me an email, happy to help. And really, I suppose, over to you, Katie, and if there's any questions, obviously more than happy to take them.
Cool, yeah, thanks a lot, Tom. I think that's really interesting, and you raised some points that actually some people might not have considered before. I think we're in such strange times that even some of the things might seem like common sense. Actually, there's so much you need to do that often things can possibly be overlooked and forgotten. I don't think anyone's actually asked questions on the question tab itself, but I might as well run through. Oh, we do have one question here that's just come in. So from Noel, in terms of the comment about liability in the US, could you provide more information on this, a link or some sort of to more detail?
Yeah, I mean, I can Noel, yeah, I can certainly provide you with a link to some of the issues around that. If you send me an email, then I can obviously send that to you.
Cool. And we do have a question that's just come up, so I'll read it out. Thomas says, I found booking slot systems ineffective, as you can be left with empty slots when plans change. More detailed planning procedures require greater resource. Do you have any experience of this? He manages 50 individuals across 8 labs, and the weekly planning is a nightmare.
Yeah, sounds it. Yeah, definitely. I think with Thomas's question, it might be best if I had maybe potentially take that offline, just to find out a little bit more information and see if there is something that I can help with, especially with planning procedures. It's difficult without knowing more information on that one, but I can certainly get back to him on that.
Cool. Yeah, I can link you both up. Just to run through the polls. So we asked a few polls throughout the webinar. The first one was, what is the biggest challenge in your lab right now? And social distancing, unsurprisingly, 69% of the people that answered said social distancing, 15% said the backlog of work, 3% said having to deal with increased testing, and 13% said that it was lack of resource. And then we asked also, do you currently have social distancing measures in place? 88% said yes, so that's good. And 89% said yes, and then 11% said not yet, but we are working on it. So hopefully you've got some useful tips and checklists from Tom today. The webinar is recorded, so you can watch a replay after. You can forward the link on to your colleagues if they want to watch it as well. And we will be doing these webinars frequently. The next one that we've got is on registration for lab technicians, and that will be with the Science Council, so please do join us for that. But I just want to say a massive thank you again to Tom for all your insight and knowledge, and hopefully you've got some things to take away from that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Katie, as well. Yeah, appreciate your time as well. And thanks everyone for joining us.
Cool. Thanks a lot, everyone. Take care and stay safe.